My name is Nadia Lewis. I'm 34 years old, a school counselor here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. People call me patient, maybe even too trusting, a trait I never thought would backfire so painfully. One evening, at my mother-in-law Vivian's elegant dining table, 23 guests were served sizzling steaks and rich desserts. Everyone, except me. My plate sat empty under the chandelier, glowing like a cruel spotlight on my humiliation. My cheeks burned, my stomach twisted, and still, no one moved. When my aunt finally asked why, Vivian smiled thinly, tilted her head, and said the words that split me in two. I only ordered for family. If you are watching this, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And tell me, have you ever been excluded by people who should have embraced you? Because I promise, I read every single story. The silence that followed was suffocating. The clink of silverware stopped, the laughter dried up, and all eyes turned toward me, waiting for me to shrink. But inside, something cracked. What Vivian thought was just another cruel jab was, in fact, the spark that would light my revenge. I didn't grow up with chandeliers or servers carrying trays. My childhood was a small 2-bedroom home on the south side of Milwaukee. My parents worked hard. Dad ran a corner hardware store. Mom took shifts at the library. We didn't have much, but we had warmth, and I thought that was enough. By the time I was a teenager, people often described me as the peacemaker. I was the girl who smoothed over fights between my cousins, the one who apologized just to end an argument, even when I wasn't wrong. That trait, too trusting, too willing to keep the peace, would become both my strength and my curse. When I met Daniel, I thought I had found the missing piece. He was handsome, steady, and most importantly, he seemed to love me exactly as I was. We met at a volunteer event, organizing books for underprivileged kids. He had an easy smile and a gentleness that drew me in. We dated for 2 years, and when he asked me to marry him, I said yes without hesitation. What I did not fully understand at the time was that I was not just marrying Daniel. I was marrying into the Mitchell family, and the Mitchells were nothing like the family I grew up in. Daniel's family was wealthy, established, the kind of people whose holiday cards looked like glossy magazine spreads. Their home was a sprawling estate in the suburbs, complete with a landscaped garden and rooms that smelled like polished wood and imported candles. At the center of it all was Vivian, Daniel's mother. Vivian wasn't cruel in the obvious way at first. She was the kind of woman who could smile sweetly while cutting you down. At family gatherings, she'd make comments about my thrift store dress choices, or ask how much my counselor's salary really covered. Always with a laugh, always light enough that if I objected, I'd look oversensitive. The first time I tried to contribute to the family's Thanksgiving, I baked a pie from scratch. I walked into that gleaming kitchen with my head high, proud of what I'd made. Vivian looked at it, smiled, and then slid it into a corner behind store-bought cheesecakes she'd ordered. My pie never touched the table. Daniel told me I was imagining things, but I wasn't. I felt it, the dismissal, the message. Over time, these little moments piled up. A comment about how Daniel could have married someone from a better family. A joke about how I probably wasn't used to steak cooked properly. A pointed glance when I arrived late from work, still in my counselor's clothes instead of a cocktail dress. At first, I brushed them aside. I told myself love was compromise. That if I just kept smiling, if I kept showing up, if I worked harder to fit in, eventually Vivian would see me as part of the family. But here's the thing. People like Vivian don't want you to fit in. They want you to stay exactly where they put you, on the outside, looking in. Still, I tried. For Daniel. For the idea of family unity. I stayed quiet through so many small humiliations, biting my tongue until I could taste blood. I convinced myself that keeping the peace was better than making a scene. Until that night, that dinner, that empty plate glowing under the chandelier. because in that moment, I realized something that should have been clear all along. This wasn't about family unity. This was about control, and my silence had been feeding her power all along. That was the night I stopped being the peacemaker. The dinner humiliation wasn't the first sign of trouble. Looking back, the cracks in the facade had been there from the very beginning. It just took me too long to see them. Vivian had a talent for disguising her cruelty as tradition. The first Christmas I spent with the Mitchells, she handed out personalized stockings embroidered with everyone's names. Daniel, his siblings, their spouses, even the grandchildren had theirs lined up over the fireplace. Mine? Absent. When I asked, she smiled and said, "Oh, I didn't know if you'd still be around next year." Everyone laughed. I forced a smile, but deep down it stung like a lash. There was the family vacation to Florida, where Daniel's siblings brought their partners. Everyone was invited to dinners and outings, but somehow my name was left off the reservations. "It must have been a mistake," Vivian said, her lips tight, her eyes glinting. "Except mistakes don't happen 3 times in a row." Daniel never knew how to handle it. Whenever I confided in him, he'd tell me I was reading too much into it. He hated conflict, and I, too trusting, was always the one to let it go. But letting it go didn't erase the ache in my chest every time I felt like an intruder in my own husband-as family. Then there were the dinners. Oh, the dinners. Vivian presided over her table like a queen, orchestrating every detail. The seating arrangements always left me at the far end, next to a cousin I barely knew, or a family friend who never remembered my name. My suggestions for dishes were ignored, my attempts at conversation brushed aside. If I tried to share a story, she'd interrupt with something louder, more glamorous, more important. One night, I tried to bring a casserole I'd worked hard on after a 12-hour day at school. It never made it past the kitchen. When I asked Daniel about it later, he shrugged. Mom probably didn't want to mix menus. But the store-bought rolls she picked up from the bakery had been given a place of honor. Little by little, I felt myself shrinking in that house. I'd come home after these dinners and sit in the car for 10 extra minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, fighting tears. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight back. But instead, I told myself to endure. Until the whispers started. At a summer barbecue, I overheard Vivian talking to Daniel's aunt. I had stepped inside to grab more iced tea when I caught her words drifting through the window. "She's sweet, but she'll never really belong." Daniel settled. I froze. Settled. That single word felt like a knife. And yet, when I told Daniel, he sighed, rubbed his temples, and said, "That's just Mom. Don't take it personally." But how could I not? Each small humiliation piled onto the last like bricks on my chest. I tried to remind myself I was educated, hardworking, respected in my own world. But in Vivian's world, I was reduced to nothing more than the outsider. And here's the cruelest part. The family saw it. They watched me being sidelined, diminished, erased, and not one of them spoke up. By the time that fateful dinner rolled around, when Vivian smirked and said, "I only ordered for family," the pattern was clear. This wasn't neglect. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was war. And though I didn't know it yet, that empty plate would be the line I refused to cross again. The night of the betrayal is seared into me like a burn. Every detail is frozen in place. The way the chandelier light glinted off the polished silverware, the low hum of conversation, the scent of roasted garlic and seared steak filling the air. Daniel and I arrived a little late. I had worked late at the school, helping a student who didn't want to go home, and barely had time to change into a navy blue dress before we left. As we walked into Vivian's house, I forced myself to smile. I told myself tonight would be different. Tonight, maybe she'd see me as more than the outsider. I should have known better. The table was long enough to host a royal banquet. 23 guests sat in their assigned seats, each place card written in Vivian's delicate script. Mine was tucked at the far end, near the kitchen door, as usual. Daniel sat closer to the center beside his siblings. I smoothed my dress, took my seat, and reminded myself to breathe. Then the servers began moving around the table. Plates landed with a satisfying clink. Juicy steaks cooked medium rare, potatoes whipped with butter, vegetables glistening under a light glaze, glasses of wine filled, rolls passed in baskets, laughter rising as the food arrived. And then, nothing. I looked down. My plate was still bare. I glanced up, expecting the next server to bring mine. He passed me by. Another followed. Still nothing. Around me, knives scraped, forks clinked. Everyone else's plates were full, steaming, fragrant. Mine sat empty, cold, mocking. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe the servers missed me. Maybe mine was coming from the kitchen. I forced a small laugh, hoping to cover my rising discomfort. But then I caught Vivian's eyes across the table. She was watching me, smiling. That knowing, razor-thin smile that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. The chatter around the table faltered as people began to notice. My aunt, seated across from me, frowned. "Why doesn't Nadia have a plate?" she asked, her voice uncertain, cutting through the silence. That's when Vivian leaned back in her chair, crossed her manicured hands, and delivered the line that still echoes inside me. "I only ordered for family." The words dropped like glass shattering on tile. The entire table froze. My face went hot, then cold. I felt 23 pairs of eyes on me, waiting for me to shrink, to laugh it off, to pretend I didn't just get gutted in front of them all. Daniel's fork hovered in midair. He opened his mouth, closed it, and looked down at his plate. He didn't say a word. Not one word. In that moment, the air left my lungs. Humiliation wrapped around me like chains. I forced a brittle smile, the kind you wear to keep from crying. My fingers dug into my napkin under the table until my knuckles went white. The silence stretched. Someone coughed. Glasses clinked nervously. Then, as if nothing had happened, conversation resumed. Laughter rose again, knives cut into steak, and I sat there, invisible, excluded, erased. I told myself not to cry. Not here. Not in front of her. If Vivian wanted to see me break, she'd be disappointed. I sat tall, lifted my water glass, and sipped as if I were part of the meal I wasn't allowed to join. But inside, I was already gone. I didn't eat. I didn't speak. I listened as they discussed vacations, careers, and gossip, all while my stomach twisted and my heart pounded. Each word reminded me I wasn't welcome. I wasn't one of them. And Daniel, the man who promised to protect me, sat silently beside his family's cruelty. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just another slight. This wasn't a forgotten casserole or a stocking left off the mantel. This was open warfare, a declaration that I was nothing. But here's the thing about humiliation. It doesn't always break you. Sometimes it sharpens you. As I sat at that long, glittering table with my empty plate glowing like proof of my outsider status, I made myself a silent vow. This wouldn't be the story of how I was erased. It would be the story of how I made them choke on their own arrogance. I didn't sleep that night. When Daniel and I drove home after the dinner, the silence in the car was louder than any argument. He gripped the steering wheel, eyes locked on the road, while I stared out the window, watching the city lights smear across the glass. I waited for him to say something. Anything. An apology. A defense. A shred of acknowledgement. But the only words that came were weak. Don't take it personally. That's just Mom. Just Mom. My chest tightened. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't just alone at the dinner table. I was alone in my marriage. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Vivian's words replayed in my head like a cruel lullaby. I only ordered for family. I thought about every slight before it, the stockings, the forgotten pie, the whispers I was never supposed to hear. Every time I swallowed my pride, every time I told myself to keep the peace. And suddenly, I saw the pattern clearly. My kindness hadn't earned me respect. It had painted a target on my back. My patience hadn't won me a place at the table. It had confirmed for Vivian that I'd accept being pushed off it. That realization broke something inside me. For years, I'd been Nadia the peacemaker. The one who smoothed over fights. The one who said, "It's fine," even when it wasn't. The one who believed love and silence could change people. But lying there in the dark, my body still rigid with humiliation, I knew she had killed that version of me. And in her place, someone new was being born. I thought about the way Vivian smirked when my plate stayed empty, the way Daniel lowered his eyes instead of raising his voice. I thought about the way the entire family had let it happen, watched it happen, and then carried on with their meal as if nothing was wrong. That wasn't family. That was a performance, and I had been cast as the outsider, written out of the script before I even arrived. But they had underestimated me, because while Vivian believed humiliation would shrink me, it did the opposite. It crystallized me. It stripped away every excuse I had made for them, every scrap of hope that one day I'd be welcomed, every justification for my silence. Lying there, staring into the dark, I made myself a promise. I would never sit at their table in shame again. If they thought they could erase me, I would make sure they remembered me. Not as the quiet outsider, not as Daniel's too patient wife, but as the woman who exposed them, shattered their illusion, and left them speechless. It wasn't about revenge in that moment. Not yet. It was about survival. About reclaiming the part of me they had tried to take away. And I knew exactly where to start. Because here, as the thing, Vivian wasn't as perfect as she wanted the world to believe. I had seen glimpses, paper trails, whispers, conversations she thought no one heard. Things that could unravel her queen of the family facade in seconds. At that dinner, she took my dignity. But soon, I would take her crown. Revenge doesn't start with fire. It starts with frost, cold, deliberate, careful. The morning after that dinner, I woke up with swollen eyes and a throat raw from holding back tears. Daniel had already left for work, leaving a scribbled note on the counter. "Don't dwell on it. Don't dwell on it." I crumpled the note in my fist. He had no idea that I wasn't just dwelling. I was planning. For years, I had collected scraps of knowledge about Vivian without even realizing it. Working as a school counselor, I dealt with budgets, paperwork, and community programs all the time. And Vivian, in her desperate need to look generous, had her name attached to several local charities. She loved to parade her philanthropy at social events, bragging about donations and scholarships. But I knew better. I had seen things. Months earlier, one of the charity coordinators had quietly mentioned that some of the Mitchell family funds didn't always reach their intended programs. "Paperwork errors," she'd said, her tone tight, eyes darting away. At the time, I filed it away as gossip. But after the dinner, it clicked. If Vivian wanted to humiliate me publicly, I would return the favor. Except I wouldn't use insults. I'd use the truth. I started small. After work, I went to the public records office. I requested documents, tax filings, donation records, property transfers. It took patience, but patterns began to emerge. Numbers that didn't line up. Donations that disappeared. Programs that reported less funding than Vivian bragged about providing. Piece by piece, a picture formed. Vivian had been siphoning money. Charity funds, family trusts, even community donations, redirecting them into management costs that suspiciously lined up with her lifestyle upgrades. The woman who told me I wasn't family had been stealing from her own. I bought a binder and started filling it. Receipts, copies, transcripts of conversations I'd overheard at family events. I even managed to get a few discreet email printouts from a friend who worked with one of the charity boards. The more I gathered, the stronger my resolve grew. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person she had cheated, every reputation she had manipulated, every family member she had convinced to stay silent. But exposing Vivian couldn't be rushed. I had to be strategic. If I shouted too soon, she'd twist it back on me. She was skilled at gaslighting, painting herself as the victim, making others doubt what they'd seen with their own eyes. So I decided to let her arrogance work against her. At the next family gathering, I stayed calm. I smiled. I even thanked her for hosting. My silence unnerved her. I could see it in the way she narrowed her eyes at me across the table. She expected me to sulk or argue. Instead, I let her believe I was still weak, still desperate for approval. All the while, I was sharpening the knife she had handed me. I began planting subtle seeds among the family. During casual conversations, I'd drop small comments. It's funny the local paper said the scholarship fund was running low, but Vivian announced a huge donation. Or, I heard the charity board was struggling with missing funds. Must be hard to manage all that. I never accused her directly. I just asked questions. And in wealthy families, questions spread faster than answers. Meanwhile, I rehearsed what I would do when the time came. I pictured the dinner table, her smug smile, the same chandelier light overhead. Only this time, instead of me sitting with an empty plate, she'd be the one exposed, stripped bare of her carefully curated image. The humiliation she gave me would be returned tenfold, not out of spite, but out of justice. Because if she believed I wasn't family, then she had no idea how ruthless an outsider could be when pushed too far. I closed my binder one night, staring at the neatly labeled tabs: donations, transfers, receipts, testimonies. It was all there, everything I needed to destroy her lies. And I whispered to myself in the quiet kitchen, "You starved me at your table, Vivian. Now I'll make sure you choke on the truth." Revenge doesn't happen all at once. It brews slowly, like a storm gathering at the horizon. My first moves weren't grand gestures. They were whispers, carefully placed cracks in the image Vivian had spent decades polishing. It started at another dinner, just 2 weeks after the humiliation. This time, I arrived early, binder tucked safely away at home, but knowledge burning in my mind. I greeted everyone warmly, even Vivian. She eyed me suspiciously, like a predator unsure why the prey was smiling. During dinner, the topic of local charities came up, Vivian's favorite stage. She launched into a rehearsed speech about her generosity, how her work had saved countless children. Everyone nodded politely, though I noticed a few cousins stifling yawns. That was when I leaned forward, casual, almost innocent. "That's amazing, Vivian. But isn't it strange the paper reported the Mitchell Scholarship Fund was running low? I thought you just made a huge donation." The table went silent. Eyes flicked between us. Vivian's smile froze. She waved a hand. "Oh, newspapers get things wrong all the time." I nodded sweetly. "Of course. I was just curious." And just like that, the seed was planted. A single question that lingered long after the plates were cleared. Later that evening, one of Daniel's cousins cornered me in the hallway. "Hey, Nadia, about what you said earlier. Do you think something's wrong with the fund?" I shrugged, feigning innocence. "I don't know, but numbers don't lie." That was the first crack. The second came at a charity event a week later. I knew Vivian would be there, holding court in her designer gown. I made sure to speak with the coordinator, quietly, off to the side, where others could overhear. "It is such a shame the funds aren't reaching the programs the way they were supposed to. Must be frustrating for you." Her tight smile and nervous glance were all I needed. Within days, whispers began circulating. People wondered aloud if Vivian's generosity was more performance than truth. Back at family gatherings, I noticed the shift. Conversations that once centered on Vivian now drifted elsewhere. Relatives who used to hang on her every word exchanged skeptical looks. Her laugh sounded a little too forced, her eyes a little too sharp. Even Daniel began to notice. One evening, he asked, "What are you doing, Nadia? You seem different." I looked at him, calm and steady. "I'm just tired of being silent." Small victories, yes, but victories nonetheless. For the first time, I felt the balance tipping. I was no longer the outsider sitting at the end of the table, begging for scraps of approval. I was the one quietly pulling strings, reshaping the narrative. And Vivian knew it. I could see it in the way she studied me, her smile stretched too tight, her questions edged with suspicion. She had spent years underestimating me. Now, for the first time, she was beginning to wonder what I was capable of. And that fear was my first taste of satisfaction. Because soon, I wouldn't just plant questions, I'd serve answers. The night of my revenge was not an accident. It was planned down to the last detail. It was the Mitchell family's annual holiday dinner, held in Vivian's grand dining room. The chandelier sparkled above a table draped in white linen, polished silver, and crystal goblets. Every detail screamed perfection, just the way she liked it. And just like before, 23 guests gathered, Daniel seated at her right hand, me pushed down toward the far end. But this time, I wasn't the woman waiting for scraps. I had come prepared. All week, I had rehearsed my timing, my words, the placement of my binder hidden neatly inside my leather tote. I'd chosen my outfit deliberately, a simple black dress with pearls my mother had given me, understated but strong. I wanted every part of me to radiate calm control. Dinner began the way it always did. Vivian holding court, her laugh just a little too loud, her stories just a little too polished. She raised her glass halfway through the meal, launching into her usual speech about generosity, community, family. The guests nodded, as they always had. That was when I stood. At first, no one reacted. People assumed I was excusing myself, but I cleared my throat and said, "I'd like to add something tonight." The room went still. Forks clinked down on china. Daniel glanced at me nervously, his brows furrowed. Vivian's eyes narrowed, her smile tightening like a noose. I lifted my glass. For years, I've listened to stories at this table, about family, about generosity, about appearances. But tonight, I think it's time we talk about the truth. Gasps rippled down the table. Vivian tried to interrupt. "Nadia, dear, this isn't the time." I cut her off, calm and steady. "It's exactly the time." Then I reached into my tote and pulled out the binder. I opened it, pages neatly tabbed and highlighted, and placed it squarely in the center of the table where everyone could see. You've all heard about the Mitchell Family Scholarship Fund. The donations, the galas, the speeches about helping children. What you haven't seen, I said, flipping a page, are the records showing those donations being rerouted into management costs. A murmur surged across the table. I turned another page. Here are the filings, the public documents, the missing funds. I looked straight at Vivian. Her face drained of color. And here is where those funds conveniently align with your home renovations, your luxury vacations, and your shopping accounts. The silence was deafening. One uncle leaned forward, squinting at the documents. A cousin whispered, "Is this real?" I met their eyes and nodded. Every word, every number, every receipt. Vivian slammed her hand on the table. "This is outrageous! How dare you bring lies into my home?" I tilted my head, calm. "If it's lies, you'll have no problem explaining them when the charity board calls tomorrow. I've already sent them copies." Gasps again. This time sharper, heavier. Daniel sat frozen, eyes darting between me and his mother. His lips parted, but no words came. And then, the final blow. I pulled out a letter from the charity coordinator, confirming an investigation had already begun. I slid it across the table. "This isn't my accusation, Vivian. It's theirs. I just made sure you couldn't hide it anymore." The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Shocked, angry, betrayed. A cousin demanded answers. An aunt shook her head, tears brimming. Someone muttered, "All these years." But Vivian? She sat stiff, pale, trembling with rage she couldn't disguise. For once she had no words. And in that silence, the same silence she once used to humiliate me, I found my power. I looked around the table, my voice steady. "You told me I wasn't family, Vivian. But tonight I'm giving this family the truth you've stolen from them." The chandelier sparkled above me, casting light on every shocked face, every broken illusion. This time, I wasn't the one sitting with an empty plate. This time, I was the one serving. The fallout was instant, but its ripples spread for weeks. That night, after I dropped the binder on the table and the truth settled like broken glass across the room, the Mitchell family dinner unraveled. Guests whispered in corners. Aunts demanded explanations. Cousins exchanged looks of disbelief. No one touched their dessert. The carefully planned evening Vivian had orchestrated collapsed before her eyes. She tried to recover, of course. She raised her chin, forced a brittle laugh, and muttered, "This is all a misunderstanding. Numbers can be twisted." But no one believed her. They had seen the documents. They had heard the letter read aloud. The seed of doubt had already grown into a forest. Daniel drove us home in silence. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Finally, he said, "You blindsided her." I turned to him, steady. "She humiliated me. She stole from this family. I didn't blindside her, Daniel. I revealed her." He didn't answer, but for the first time I saw the conflict in his eyes. He couldn't deny what he'd heard, what he'd seen in black and white. His loyalty to his mother was cracking, and he didn't know how to stop it. In the days that followed, the fallout spread beyond the family. The charity board launched a formal investigation. Rumors leaked into the community. Neighbors whispered. At church, people glanced sideways at Vivian, their smiles tight, their conversations short. The woman who had once commanded every room she entered now found herself isolated. Her phone rang less. Invitations dwindled. The glossy veneer of her reputation peeled away piece by piece. And within the family, the silence grew louder. Cousins who once laughed at her jokes now avoided her calls. Aunts who once sought her approval now confronted her in hushed arguments behind closed doors. Even Daniel's siblings, who had always aligned with her, began questioning their blind loyalty. For me, the shift was almost surreal. At the next gathering, smaller, quieter, without Vivian, I walked into the room and for the first time felt eyes turn toward me, not with dismissal, but with respect. A cousin clapped me on the shoulder. An aunt murmured, "You were brave." Someone else whispered, "We should have spoken up sooner." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The power wasn't in their words, it was in the silence that followed. The silence where once I had been erased, now Vivian was. At work, I found myself standing taller. With friends, I laughed more freely. In the mirror, I saw a woman who had chosen dignity over silence. And though Daniel still struggled, torn between me and his mother, I felt a strength growing inside me that didn't depend on him. Whether he stood with me or not, I had reclaimed myself. The humiliation of that empty plate was gone. In its place was the memory of Vivian's pale face, her lips trembling, her kingdom crumbling around her. For once, justice wasn't a dream. It was real, tangible, and undeniable. And the woman who once told me I wasn't family, she was finally learning what it felt like to be excluded. Christmas lights still twinkled across Milwaukee when I realized my life would never be the same. Not because of Vivian's cruelty, but because of how I chose to answer it. For years I believed family meant enduring slights, swallowing insults, and keeping the peace no matter the cost. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, eventually I'd earn my seat at their table. But silence only feeds bullies, and humiliation only grows when you let it fester. That night at the grand dining table, when my plate sat empty under the chandelier, I felt erased. But by speaking up, by exposing the truth, I didn't just reclaim my place. I built a new one on my own terms. Daniel still struggles to reconcile his loyalties, and maybe he always will. But I no longer live for his family's approval or anyone else's. I know who I am. Nadia Lewis, 34, school counselor, too trusting once, maybe, but not anymore. I'm not the woman who begged to belong. I'm the woman who proved she didn't need their acceptance to stand tall. And that's the lesson I carry forward. Revenge isn't about cruelty. It's about balance. It's about showing people that when they try to erase you, they only draw the outlines of the strength you'll grow into. So, if you've ever been humiliated by the very people who should have protected you, hear me now. You are not alone. You don't have to stay silent. You don't have to stay small. If you've listened this far, thank you. Please like this video, subscribe to Unspoken Vows, and tell me in the comments, have you ever had to take back your power after being excluded or betrayed? I read every story, and your voice matters here. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't loud or violent. It's simply living so boldly that they can never silence you again.